The blood-red sunset painted the dusty horizon of Fort Worth, Texas. As Olivia Grayson stared at the empty bottle in her trembling hands, wondering if there was enough whiskey in the entire territory to wash away the memories that haunted her. The year was 1875, and the promise of a new beginning had turned to ash just like her family's homestead 3 months prior. "Another," she said, sliding the empty glass across the scarred wooden bar of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Her once fine dress, now patched and faded, hung loosely on her frame. 3 months of barely eating had hollowed her cheeks and dulled the spark in her green eyes. The bartender frowned. "Miss Grayson, don't you think you've had enough?" "I'll decide when I've had enough, Thomas," she replied, her voice carrying the rasp of someone who'd screamed until their throat was raw. The scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw twitched as she spoke, a permanent reminder of the night she'd lost everything. "Let the lady have her drink," came a deep voice from behind her. Olivia didn't bother turning. Another would-be suitor thinking a broken woman was an easy mark. Fort Worth was full of them cowboys and cattle barons looking for a pretty face to warm their beds with little commitment required. The stranger slid onto the stool beside her, and despite herself, Olivia glanced over. He wasn't what she expected. Tall and lean with weathered skin that spoke of years under the harsh Texas sun. His clothes were dusty, but well-maintained, not the flashy attire of a show-off nor the filthy rags of a drifter. His dark brown hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and his eyes were the color of the sky just before a storm. "Henry Callahan," he said, extending a hand that bore the calluses of honest work. Olivia ignored it. "I don't need saving, Mr. Callahan." He withdrew his hand without offense and nodded to the bartender. "2 whiskeys, Thomas, and some water for the lady." "I didn't ask for water," she said sharply. "No, but you'll thank me in the morning." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he spoke, hinting at a smile that didn't quite materialize on his lips. Thomas placed the drinks before them, and Henry slid 1 whiskey toward her. "I heard you lost your place in the fire." Olivia's fingers tightened around the glass. "People talk too much in this town. People care." "No," she knocked back the whiskey in 1 swallow. "People gossip. There's a difference." Henry sipped his own drink slowly. "Fair enough. But some of us do care, Miss Grayson. And what makes you so different from the others who have offered their care?" Her words dripped with sarcasm. "I'm offering you a job, not my bed," he replied evenly. That caught her off guard. Olivia studied him more carefully. His gaze was direct but not predatory, his posture relaxed but alert, like a man accustomed to watching horizons for trouble. "What kind of job?" "I have a ranch about 20 miles north of town. Lost my housekeeper last month. She got married and moved to Dallas. Place is starting to look like a tornado hit it, and I can't cook worth a damn." He shrugged. "Pay is fair. You'd have your own cabin and nobody would bother you." Olivia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So I'd be isolated on your property, completely at your mercy. Do I look like a fool?" "You look like someone who's running out of options," he said quietly. "The room above the milliner's shop won't be yours forever, and Thomas here can't keep extending your tab indefinitely." The bartender had the decency to look embarrassed as he wiped down the counter a few feet away. "How do you know where I'm staying?" Olivia demanded, suddenly alert. "Like you said, people talk." Henry finished his drink and placed a few coins on the bar. "My offer stands. I'll be heading back day after tomorrow. If you're interested, meet me at Wilson's General Store at noon." He stood, settling his hat more firmly on his head. "Good evening, Miss Grayson." Olivia watched him leave, his spurs making a soft, jingling sound on the wooden floor. Something about his straightforward manner intrigued her, but she'd learned the hard way that men rarely offered something for nothing. The next morning, Olivia woke with a pounding headache in her small, rented room. The space was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it was better than sleeping in the streets. She'd been lucky to find it after the fire, when Mrs. Patterson, the milliner, had taken pity on her. She splashed water on her face and stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The scar looked angry this morning, a jagged pink line that had forever altered her once pretty face. Her auburn hair hung limply to her shoulders, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Grayson, are you awake?" Mrs. Patterson's voice came through the door. Olivia opened it to find the older woman looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, dear, but Mr. Wilkins was quite insistent. He says your rent is 2 weeks past due." Olivia's stomach sank. Mr. Wilkins owned half the buildings in this part of town, including Mrs. Patterson's shop. "I thought we had an arrangement." "We did, but he's raising all the rents next month and he's not feeling charitable." Mrs. Patterson lowered her voice. "I'd cover it for you if I could, but with my Arthur's medical bills." "I understand," Olivia said quickly. "You've already been more than kind. I'll figure something out." After Mrs. Patterson left, Olivia sat on the edge of her bed and counted her meager savings. Not enough for another week, let alone another month. She could sell her mother's locket, the only thing she'd managed to save from the fire, but even that wouldn't buy her much time. Henry Callahan's offer echoed in her mind. A job, a cabin of her own. It could be a trap, of course, but if it wasn't. At precisely noon the following day, Olivia stood outside Wilson's General Store, her small carpet bag containing everything she owned at her feet. She'd spent the previous day asking discreet questions about Henry Callahan. What she'd learned had somewhat allayed her fears. He owned the Double C Ranch, ran about 2,000 head of cattle, and employed a dozen cowboys. He was known to be fair but reserved, and had never been linked romantically to any woman in town. "Miss Grayson." Henry's voice came from behind her. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Olivia turned to face him. In the harsh light of day, she could see the silver threading through his hair at the temples, and the tiny lines around his eyes that suggested he was closer to 40 than 30. "I haven't decided yet," she said. "I'm just exploring my options." Henry nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. "Wise. Would you like to see the ranch before you make up your mind? We could ride out today, and if it's not to your liking, I'll bring you back tomorrow." It was a reasonable offer, more than reasonable. "Why me?" Olivia asked suddenly. "There must be a dozen women in town who'd jump at this opportunity." A shadow passed over Henry's face. "Maybe, but they'd be looking for more than I'm offering. A wedding ring, eventually. I'm not in the market for a wife, Miss Grayson, just a housekeeper." There was a story there, but Olivia didn't press. She had her own secrets to keep. "Very well," she said. "I'll see your ranch." The journey took several hours, their wagon rumbling along rutted trails that stretched through rolling hills covered in bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. Spring had come early to Texas that year, and despite herself, Olivia found the landscape beautiful. They passed several smaller homesteads and crossed 2 creeks before Henry pointed ahead. "There it is, the Double C." The ranch spread out before them, a large main house built of sturdy timber, a barn and stables, several corrals, and, set a little apart, a small cabin nestled beneath a stand of oak trees. "That would be your place," Henry said, following her gaze. "It's nothing fancy, but it's solid. No leaks, good stove, and I had the boys clean it out yesterday, just in case." Olivia felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. As they pulled up to the main house, several cowboys paused in their work to stare curiously. A tall man with graying hair approached the wagon. "This is Frank Murphy, my foreman," Henry said as he helped Olivia down. Frank, Miss Olivia Grayson. She might be taking over as housekeeper. Frank tipped his hat. Madam, that'd be a blessing. The boss can't boil water without burning it. Henry rolled his eyes. Don't listen to him. I can boil water just fine. It's everything else that gives me trouble. The easy banter between them spoke of years of friendship and trust, another point in Henry's favor. Let me show you the house, Henry said. The main house was spacious but Spartan, clearly a man's domain with minimal decorative touches. The kitchen was well equipped but showed signs of neglect, and dust had collected on surfaces throughout. It's a mess, Henry admitted, but it's sturdy and warm in winter, cool in summer. And my duties would be? Olivia asked, running a finger along a dusty shelf. Cooking, cleaning, mending. Nothing unreasonable. You'd have Sundays to yourself and Saturday afternoons once the lunch dishes are done. It all seemed straightforward enough. And my cabin. Henry led her back outside and down a well-trodden path to the small structure he'd pointed out earlier. Inside, Olivia found a single room with a curtained-off sleeping area, a small kitchen space with a cast-iron stove, and simple but sturdy furniture. It's not much, Henry said, watching her reaction carefully. It's more than I have now, Olivia replied honestly. Then you'll stay, Olivia hesitated, looking out the small window toward the main house. It was a risk, but a calculated one. Yes, for now. Henry nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good. We'll start tomorrow. The first week was exhausting. Years of bachelor living had left the house in worse condition than Olivia had initially assessed. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, beat rugs, and organized a kitchen that seemed to have no rhyme or reason to its storage system. Henry kept his distance, riding out with the men most days and returning only for meals, which he complimented with restrained enthusiasm. Best food I've had in years, he'd say, before retreating to his study with account books or correspondence. The ranch hands were polite but cautious around her. Olivia heard whispers when they thought she couldn't hear speculation about her scar, about her relationship with the boss, about her past. She ignored them and focused on her work. By the second week, a routine had developed. Olivia rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Henry and any hands who were eating at the main house. After they departed, she tackled her cleaning and preparation for the midday meal. Afternoons were for mending, baking, and occasionally walking the grounds to gather wildflowers or herbs from the small kitchen garden behind the house. It was during one such afternoon, 3 weeks after her arrival, that everything changed. Olivia was kneeling in the garden, harvesting sprigs of rosemary when a shadow fell across her. She looked up to find Henry watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. "You've transformed the place," he said. Olivia brushed dirt from her hands. "It needed attention." "Yes, it did." He hesitated, then added, "Frank tells me the men are eating better than they ever have. They've stopped complaining about coming back to the ranch after cattle drives. I'm glad they're satisfied." Olivia stood, her basket of herbs in hand. "Are you?" Henry asked suddenly. "Satisfied, I mean." The question caught her off guard. Was she satisfied? The work was hard but straightforward. Her cabin was comfortable. She hadn't had a drink since arriving, finding the physical exhaustion preferable to alcohol-induced oblivion. But satisfaction seemed a foreign concept after everything she'd lost. "I'm surviving," she answered truthfully. Henry nodded as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. "I've got to ride into Fort Worth tomorrow, business with the bank. Would you like to come along? Perhaps visit Mrs. Patterson or pick up anything you need?" The offer was unexpected but welcome. "Yes, I'd like that." The journey to town the next day was different from their first trip together. Henry seemed more talkative, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the early days of the ranch. "My father started with nothing but 50 acres and 10 head of cattle," he explained as they crossed a creek. "By the time he died, we had 500 acres. I've added the rest over the past 15 years. "It's impressive," Olivia said, and meant it. Building something that substantial took vision and determination. "It was lonely work," Henry admitted. "Still is sometimes." Olivia glanced at him, sensing an opening to the questions she'd been harboring. "You never married?" A muscle in Henry's jaw tightened. "Once. A long time ago." The finality in his tone warned against further inquiry, but Olivia couldn't help herself. "What happened to her?" Henry's hands tightened on the reins. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. "Childbirth," he finally said, his voice flat. "Her and the baby both. 19 years ago this summer." "I'm sorry," Olivia said softly, understanding now his reluctance to seek another wife. Some wounds never fully healed. "Life goes on," Henry replied, but there was a weight to his words that belied their simplicity. They rode in silence for a while before Olivia offered, "I lost my husband and son in the fire." Henry's gaze shot to her face. "I'd heard about the fire, but not that." People know what they saw: a woman pulled from a burning homestead, half her face melted by the heat. Olivia's hand unconsciously rose to her scar. "What they don't know is that James and little Michael were still inside. I tried to get back to them, but the roof collapsed." Saying it aloud was like lancing a wound, painful but necessary for healing. "That's what the dreams are about," Henry said, comprehension dawning. "I've heard you crying out some nights when I've been up late." Olivia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I didn't realize I was disturbing you." "You weren't. My study window faces your cabin, that's all." He paused. "I have dreams too sometimes. About Sarah." The simple admission of shared pain created a bond between them that hadn't existed before. When they reached Fort Worth, Henry helped her down from the wagon with a gentleness that felt new. "I'll be at the bank for about an hour," he said. "Meet me at the general store when you're ready to head back." Olivia visited Mrs. Patterson first, paying back the small debt she owed with her first wages and purchasing some fabric to make new curtains for her cabin. The milliner was delighted to see her looking healthier, and asked pointed questions about Henry Callahan that Olivia deflected with practiced ease. Her next stop was the apothecary, where she bought salves for chapped hands and a tonic that promised to help with sleeplessness. As she was leaving, she nearly collided with Thomas from the Silver Dollar. "Miss Grayson," he exclaimed, "we all wondered where you disappeared to." "I found employment," she said simply. Thomas nodded knowingly. "With Callahan, right? Word gets around." His expression grew serious. "Listen, there's something you should know. There's been talk about Olivia." She turned to find Henry standing behind her, his business at the bank apparently concluded earlier than expected. His expression was tight, his eyes fixed on Thomas with undisguised dislike. "Henry," she acknowledged, puzzled by the tension crackling between the two men. "Are you ready to head back?" Henry asked, not taking his eyes off the bartender. Thomas took a step back. "Just looking out for an old customer, Callahan. No harm meant." "I'm sure," Henry replied coldly. He placed a hand lightly on Olivia's elbow. "Let's go." As they walked to the wagon, Olivia couldn't contain her curiosity. "What was that about?" Henry's jaw was set in a hard line. "Thomas Preston likes to run his mouth. Most of what comes out is horse manure." "He seemed to be warning me about something," Olivia pressed. "About you, maybe?" Henry helped her into the wagon before climbing up beside her. For a long moment he stared at the reins in his hands. "There are rumors," he finally said, "about what happened to Sarah. Some people in town think I had something to do with her death." Olivia felt her breath catch. "Did you?" The bluntness of her question seemed to surprise him. His eyes, when they met hers, were clear and direct. "No, but I blame myself all the same. I should have gotten the doctor sooner. Should have insisted she go to her mother's in Dallas for the birth. Should have done 100 things differently." The raw honesty in his voice convinced Olivia more than protestations of innocence ever could. "Guilt isn't the same as culpability, Henry." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded once. "No, I suppose it isn't." The ride back to the ranch was quieter than their journey into town, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the Double C, Henry finally broke the silence. "I should have warned you about the gossip. I'm sorry you had to hear it from Preston." "I didn't actually hear anything specific," Olivia pointed out, "and I don't put much stock in town gossip anyway." Henry smiled faintly. "That's good to hear." As they pulled up to the main house, Frank Murphy hurried out to meet them, his expression grim. "Boss, we've got trouble. Sutton's men cut our fence line on the north pasture, drove off about 30 head before the boys could stop them." Henry's entire demeanor changed, tension radiating from his suddenly rigid posture. "Anyone hurt?" Young Jimmy took a bullet in the shoulder. "Doc Watson's with him now in the bunkhouse." Henry swore under his breath. "Get the men together. We're riding out at first light." He turned to Olivia. "I'm sorry, but I need to deal with this." "Of course," she said, gathering her purchases. "Is there anything I can do? Perhaps check on Jimmy later." "Doc Watson has a tendency to rush back to town if he thinks a patient is stable." Olivia nodded. "I will." She watched as Henry strode toward the bunkhouse with Frank, their heads bent in serious conversation. It was the first she'd heard of any conflict with neighbors, and it concerned her. Range wars could escalate quickly in this part of Texas. That evening, after preparing a meal for the ranch hands that would be staying behind, Olivia made her way to the bunkhouse with a basket containing broth, fresh bread, and clean bandages. The long, low building was dimly lit and smelled of tobacco, leather, and too many men living in close quarters. Several cowboys looked up in surprise as she entered. "Miss Grayson," one called out, "this ain't no place for a lady." "I've come to check on Jimmy," she said firmly. "Mr. Callahan asked me to." They exchanged glances. Then one older cowboy with a grizzled beard jerked his head toward the far end of the room. "Over there. Doc left about an hour ago." Jimmy turned out to be barely more than a boy, perhaps 19 or 20, with freckles scattered across his pale face and red hair damp with sweat. His left shoulder was heavily bandaged, and he looked up with fever-bright eyes as Olivia approached. "Well, ain't you a sight," he said, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace of pain. Olivia sat beside his bunk. "Let me see what the doctor did." Over Jimmy's weak protests, she gently removed the bandage. The wound was angry and red, clearly beginning to fester. Olivia frowned. "Has the doctor left any medicine for you?" "Just some whiskey for the pain," Jimmy replied. Olivia looked around at the other cowboys. "I need hot water, clean cloths, and if anyone has any moonshine stronger than whiskey, bring that too." To her surprise, they scrambled to obey. Within minutes, she had what she needed and set about properly cleaning the wound. Jimmy bit his lip to keep from crying out as she worked, and Olivia spoke softly to distract him. "How did this happen?" "Sutton's men," Jimmy said through gritted teeth. "They've been pushing boundaries for months. This time they went too far." "Who is Sutton?" Olivia asked, applying a poultice made from herbs she'd brought from her cabin. "Victor Sutton. Owns the Rocking S to the north. Been trying to drive Mr. Callahan out since he got here 5 years back." "Why?" Jimmy winced as she secured a fresh bandage. "Water rights, mostly. Sutton claims the creek on our northern border belongs to him. Mr. Callahan has the deed that says different." It was a common enough dispute in cattle country, but Olivia sensed there was more to it. and Mr. Sutton resorts to violence to make his point. Not usually, not until recently. Jimmy's eyes were growing heavy as exhaustion overtook him. Something changed. Sutton's got meaner. Olivia stayed until Jimmy fell asleep, then left instructions with the other men to keep the wound clean and come get her if his fever worsened. On her way back to her cabin, she paused, noticing a light still burning in Henry's study. After a moment's hesitation, she changed course and knocked lightly on the front door of the main house. Henry opened it, surprise evident on his face. "Olivia, is everything all right? Jimmy's wound is infected," she said. "I've done what I can, but he may need a better doctor than Watson if it doesn't improve by morning." Henry ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Damn it! I can't spare any men to take him to Fort Worth, not with Sutton's threats." "What exactly is happening, Henry?" Olivia asked directly. "Jimmy mentioned water rights, but this seems more personal." Henry hesitated, then stepped back from the doorway. "You might as well come in. It's a long story." Olivia followed him to his study, where maps and papers were spread across his desk. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat among them. "Victor Sutton arrived in the area about 6 years ago," Henry began, pacing the room. "Bought the old Thompson place and renamed it the Rocking S. At first he was neighborly enough. Then he started pushing boundaries, claiming the survey lines were wrong, insisting the creek belonged to him." "Why?" Olivia asked, settling into a chair. "Drought's coming. Everyone who's lived here long enough can feel it. The creek that runs through my north pasture is spring-fed. It'll keep flowing even when others dry up." Henry took a swallow of whiskey. "But there's more to it than that." "Sutton blames me for his son's death." Olivia leaned forward. "How? 2 years ago, young Peter Sutton got drunk in town and started a fight with some of my men. It spilled out into the street, and in the chaos, Peter pulled a gun. One of my cowboys, acting in self-defense, shot him." Henry's expression darkened. "The sheriff ruled it justified, but Victor's never accepted that. He's convinced I ordered his son killed." "Did you?" Henry's eyes flashed with anger. "Of course not. It was a drunken brawl that went too far, nothing more." Olivia nodded slowly. "And now he's escalating." "Yes. This is the first time his men have actually fired on mine, though." Henry rubbed his jaw wearily. "I can't let it stand, but I don't want a war." "What will you do? Ride out tomorrow, try to talk sense into him, if that doesn't work?" He shrugged, the gesture speaking volumes. "Be careful," Olivia said softly. Henry's expression softened. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your doorstep." "Trouble seems to find me regardless," Olivia replied with a wry smile. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the connection between them deepening with shared confidences and concerns. "You should get some rest," Henry finally said. "Tomorrow may be a long day for all of us." Olivia nodded and rose to leave. At the door, she paused. "Henry, promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," he said, his voice gentle. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night." Dawn broke with the sound of horses and men preparing to ride out. From her cabin window, Olivia watched as Henry conferred with Frank, his expression serious beneath the brim of his hat. He looked up suddenly, as if sensing her gaze, and raised a hand in farewell. Olivia returned the gesture, a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. The day stretched interminably. Olivia checked on Jimmy, relieved to find his fever had broken during the night. She prepared food for the remaining hands and kept busy with tasks that would normally wait for another day, anything to keep her mind occupied. It was late afternoon when she heard the sound of approaching riders. She stepped onto her cabin porch, shading her eyes against the setting sun. Her heart sank as she counted the returning men. There were fewer than had ridden out that morning. Frank spotted her and veered his horse toward her cabin while the others continued to the main house. "Miss Grayson," he called, dismounting stiffly. "The boss asked me to let you know he's fine, but he's staying behind with a few of the men to watch the fence line." Relief washed over her. What happened? Frank's weathered face was grim. Sutton wasn't interested in talking. Had his men opened fire before Mr. Callahan could say his piece? He removed his hat, twisting it in his hands. "We lost young Davis. Martinez took a bullet in the leg." "I'm so sorry," Olivia said, the news hitting her hard despite barely knowing the men involved. "Boss wants us to move the herd farther south, away from Sutton's property line. Says he'll hold position with a few men until we've got the cattle secured." Frank looked troubled. Never seen him like this. Usually, he's the one counseling caution. "Sometimes caution isn't enough," Olivia said quietly, thinking of her own losses and how they might have been prevented with more decisive action. Frank nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Anyway, he asked if you'd pack some supplies. Food, bandages, ammunition. I'll send one of the boys to collect it tomorrow. I'll have it ready." After Frank left, Olivia stood on her porch for a long time, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The vast Texas sky blazed with colors oranges and purples that gradually gave way to the deep blue of twilight. In the distance, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their yips and howls carrying on the evening breeze. She thought of Henry, camped somewhere along the northern boundary of his land, rifle at the ready. The man who'd offered her sanctuary now faced a threat to his own. The irony wasn't lost on her. For the first time in months, Olivia felt something stirring within her, a desire to protect, to fight for something beyond mere survival. It was a disquieting realization. The next morning, she packed supplies with care, hearty food that would travel well, medical supplies, extra ammunition from the storehouse where Henry kept such things. She added a few personal touches, coffee brewed strong the way he liked it, biscuits still warm from the oven. The young cowboy who came to collect the supplies raised an eyebrow at the quantity. "Expecting a siege, Miss Grayson. Better to have too much than too little," she replied. He grinned. "The boss said you were practical." The comment warmed her unexpectedly. "Did he say when he'd return?" "No, madam. Just that we should keep things running and listen to Frank." After he'd gone, Olivia found herself at loose ends. The main house was spotless, meals for the remaining hands prepared. On impulse, she decided to check on the garden, which had been neglected in recent days. She was kneeling among the vegetable rows, pulling weeds, when she heard an unfamiliar voice. Well, what have we here?" Olivia looked up to find a stranger watching her from the garden gate. He was expensively dressed for ranch work, his black hat and boots unmarked by the dust that seemed to coat everything in Texas. A silver-handled revolver gleamed at his hip. "This is private property," Olivia said, standing slowly. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his cold eyes. "I'm well aware. I'm looking for Henry Callahan." Something in his tone raised Olivia's hackles. "He's not here." "No, that's disappointing." The man opened the gate and stepped into the garden. "Perhaps you could tell me where I might find him, Miss Grayson," she supplied reluctantly. "Olivia Grayson, and you are Victor Sutton." He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "A pleasure, Miss Grayson." Ice slid down Olivia's spine. This was Henry's enemy, the man whose men had killed one of the Double C Cowboys just yesterday. "Mr. Callahan isn't here," she repeated firmly. "And I don't know when he'll return." Sutton studied her face, his gaze lingering on her scar. "You're new, Callahan's woman, are you?" "I'm his housekeeper," Olivia corrected, her tone frosty. "Is that what he calls it?" Sutton laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Interesting. He's not usually one for damaged goods." Olivia flinched despite herself, and Sutton's smile widened. "Touched a nerve, did I? My apologies. You should leave." Olivia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Oh, I will, but first a message for Callahan." Sutton's expression hardened. "Tell him this is his last chance. Sell the northern section to me or there'll be more dead cowboys. Next time I might not stop at the hired help." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise, Miss Grayson." Sutton tipped his hat again. "Good day to you." Olivia watched as he mounted his waiting horse and rode away, his back straight with the arrogance of a man accustomed to getting his way. Only when he disappeared from sight did she allow her trembling legs to give way, sinking back to the ground among the vegetables she'd been tending. She needed to warn Henry, but how? Frank had taken most of the remaining men south with the herd. The few left were barely enough to keep the ranch running, let alone serve as messengers through potentially dangerous territory. As darkness fell, Olivia came to a decision. She would go herself. The next morning, before dawn, she saddled one of the gentler horses left in the stable. She'd ridden occasionally as a girl and had watched carefully as Henry handled his mount. It couldn't be that difficult, she reasoned. She left a note for the remaining hands explaining her absence, took a rifle from the gun cabinet in Henry's study, and set out toward the northern boundary. The journey was harder than she'd anticipated. The horse, sensing her inexperience, tested her at every opportunity, stopping to graze or veering off the trail. By midday, Olivia was saddle-sore and increasingly worried that she'd made a terrible mistake. The landscape had changed, becoming rockier and more rugged. Oak and mesquite gave way to stunted junipers clinging to limestone outcroppings. The air was still and hot, the sun beating down mercilessly. It was late afternoon when Olivia finally spotted smoke rising from a small campsite nestled against a rocky ridge. Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by apprehension. What if it wasn't Henry's camp? What if Sutton's men had found them first? She approached cautiously, keeping to the cover of scattered trees. As she drew nearer, she recognized one of the double C hands standing watch, rifle cradled in his arms. "Hello, the camp," she called, not wanting to be mistaken for an intruder. The cowboy spun, raising his rifle before recognition dawned. "Miss Grayson, what in tarnation are you doing out here?" Before she could answer, Henry emerged from behind a large boulder, his expression shifting from alertness to shock to anger in quick succession. "Olivia," he strode toward her, taking the reins of her horse as she dismounted awkwardly. "Have you lost your mind? It's dangerous out here." "Sutton came to the ranch," she said without preamble. Henry's face darkened. "When?" "Yesterday afternoon. He was looking for you." Olivia rubbed her lower back, stiff from the long ride. "He left a message. Said to tell you it was your last chance to sell the northern section, or there'd be more dead cowboys." Henry swore under his breath. "And you rode all the way out here alone to tell me this. Why didn't you send one of the hands?" "There was no one to spare," Olivia replied defensively. "Frank took most of them south with the herd." "You could have been killed," Henry said, his voice tight with anger, "or worse." "I wasn't." They stared at each other, both breathing hard with emotions barely contained. Finally, Henry's shoulders sagged slightly. "You're here now. Come sit down before you fall down." He led her to the small camp, where 3 other cowboys watched with undisguised curiosity. "Jackson, take care of Miss Grayson's horse." A young cowboy jumped to obey, leading the tired animal toward where the other horses were picketed. Henry guided Olivia to a log beside the small fire and handed her a canteen. "Drink. You look half dead from the heat." She drank gratefully, the lukewarm water tasting sweeter than any wine she'd ever sampled. "Sutton threatened you specifically, Henry, not just your men." Henry sat beside her, his expression grim. "That doesn't surprise me. This has become personal for him." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing in dusty spikes. Did he harm you in any way? No, Olivia hesitated. He was unpleasant, called me damaged goods. Fury flashed across Henry's face. I'll kill him for that alone. No, you won't, Olivia said firmly. You're not a murderer, Henry Callahan. He looked at her for a long moment, then let out a harsh laugh. No, I suppose I'm not, though right now I wish I were. As night fell, Olivia found herself wrapped in Henry's spare blanket, seated close to the fire. The temperature had dropped dramatically with the sunset, a typical spring evening in North Texas. The Cowboys had tactfully arranged their bedrolls on the far side of the camp, leaving Henry and Olivia a semblance of privacy. You can't stay here, Henry said quietly. It's too dangerous. I'm not leaving without you, Olivia replied stubbornly. Henry sighed. Sutton's men have been watching the boundary. We've exchanged fire twice since yesterday. If they decide to make a concerted push, we don't have enough men to hold them off. Then come back to the ranch, regroup, and let him think I'm retreating, that I'm afraid. Henry shook his head. That would only embolden him. Is your pride worth dying for? Olivia demanded. It's not about pride, Henry said, his voice tight. It's about justice, about not letting men like Sutton take whatever they want through intimidation and violence. Olivia stared into the flames. My husband said something similar once, the night before he died. Henry was silent for a long moment. What happened, Olivia? Really happened, I mean. She'd never told anyone the full story. Not the sheriff who investigated, not Mrs. Patterson, not even the doctor who treated her burns. But here, under the vast Texas sky with danger lurking just beyond the firelight, the truth seemed to demand release. James borrowed money from a man named Edward Blackwood to expand our farm, she began, her voice low. When the drought hit 2 summers ago, we couldn't pay it back on time. Blackwood sent men to collect by any means necessary. Henry's face was shadowed in the firelight, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze. They came at night. James tried to reason with them, said he'd have the money soon. They didn't want to hear it. Olivia's fingers traced the ridge of her scar unconsciously. They beat him, made me watch. Then they started breaking things, saying they'd take it out in property if not in cash. She took a shuddering breath. When they knocked over a lantern and the curtains caught fire, they just laughed. Said maybe Blackwood could collect the insurance instead. They dragged me outside, but James was still inside, too badly hurt to move, and Michael was asleep upstairs. My God, Henry murmured. I tried to go back in. One of them caught me, held me back. His knife caught my face when I struggled. Olivia's voice had gone flat, emotionless. The roof collapsed before I could break free. I heard James calling for help, heard Michael screaming. Then nothing. Henry reached for her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. I'm so sorry, Olivia. The sheriff investigated, but Blackwood had friends in high places. It was ruled an accident, a tragic mishap with a lantern. Bitterness crept into her tone. I started drinking after that, trying to forget the sounds, the smells. It didn't work. It never does, Henry said softly. They sat in silence for a while, the crackling fire and distant coyote calls the only sounds. Henry's hand remained wrapped around hers, warm and steady. I'm damaged beyond repair, Olivia finally confessed, voicing the thought that had haunted her for months. Inside, not just my face. I don't know how to live with what happened, with what I lost. Henry turned to face her fully. In the firelight, his eyes were dark and intent. Then we'll build something new, he said simply. The words hung between them, profound in their simplicity, yet breathtaking in their implications. Olivia felt something crack inside her chest, the hard shell of grief that had encased her heart beginning to fracture. I don't know if I can, she whispered. Neither do I, Henry admitted, but I'd like to try. Before she could respond, one of the cowboys on watch called out softly, "Riders approaching, boss." Henry was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "How many? Can't tell yet. More than a few." "Wake the others," Henry ordered. "Olivia, stay low and behind the rocks." The peaceful moment shattered as the camp erupted into activity. Cowboys rolled from their blankets, grabbing weapons and taking positions among the rocks. Henry guided Olivia to a natural hollow behind a large boulder. "Stay here," he said firmly. "If shooting starts, keep your head down." Olivia nodded, clutching the rifle she'd brought from the ranch. "Be careful." The approaching riders slowed as they neared the camp. In the moonlight, Olivia could make out 6 or 7 men, their features indistinct shadows beneath their hats. "Callahan," a voice called out. "We know you're there." Henry stepped forward just to the edge of the firelight, his rifle held casually but ready. "This is private property, gentlemen. State your business." A figure dismounted and walked a few paces closer. Even in the dim light, Olivia recognized Victor Sutton. "My business is simple," Sutton replied. "I've come to make you an offer one last time." "I'm not selling," Henry said flatly. Sutton sighed theatrically. "I thought you might say that, which is why I brought along some persuasion." He gestured, and his men fanned out, surrounding the camp at a distance. "You're outnumbered, Callahan. Be reasonable." Henry didn't flinch. "Reasonable would be you respecting property lines established by legal deeds, Sutton. Reasonable would be not shooting my men or threatening my household." "Ah yes, your housekeeper." Sutton's tone dripped with insinuation. "Lovely woman despite the unfortunate face. I met her yesterday." Olivia saw Henry's posture stiffen but was proud when he didn't rise to the bait. "What do you want, Sutton, really want? This can't just be about water rights." Sutton stepped closer, his face now visible in the firelight. Hatred had carved deep lines around his mouth and eyes, aging him beyond his years. "What I want, Callahan, is to see you suffer like I've suffered, to lose everything you care about just like I lost Peter." "Your son pulled a gun in a crowded street," Henry said evenly. "What happened was tragic but not murder." "Liar," Sutton spat. "My boy would never have drawn first. Your man murdered him and you protected the killer." Olivia watched the exchange with growing dread. There was no reasoning with grief twisted into this kind of hatred. She'd seen it in her own reflection in those dark days after the fire. "I'm sorry about Peter," Henry said, his voice softer now. "Truly. But killing more people won't bring him back." For a moment, something flickered in Sutton's expression, a glimpse of the man he might have been before loss hardened him. Then it was gone, replaced by cold resolve. "Enough talk. Here's my final offer. Sign over the northern section tonight or we burn you out. Every building, every head of cattle, everything. Just like you burned my future when you took my only child." Henry was silent for a long moment. Olivia could almost see him weighing options, calculating odds. The Double C hands were outnumbered, possibly outgunned. Even if they survived this confrontation, Sutton's vendetta wouldn't end. "If I sign," Henry finally said, "you'll leave my people alone. No more attacks, no more threats." Sutton nodded. "You have my word." "The word of a man who ambushes cowboys and threatens women doesn't carry much weight," Henry replied dryly. Olivia couldn't stay silent any longer. She stood, stepping out from behind the boulder. "Mr. Sutton." All heads turned toward her. Henry's expression was a mixture of alarm and exasperation. "Miss Grayson," Sutton acknowledged, surprise evident in his tone. "I didn't expect to find you here." "I know something about loss," Olivia said, moving to stand beside Henry. "I know what it does to you, how it twists everything inside until hatred seems like the only thing keeping you upright." Sutton's eyes narrowed. "You know nothing about me. I know you had a son named Peter. I know you loved him. I know his death left a hole in your life that nothing seems to fill." Olivia took a steadying breath. "I lost my husband and child in a fire. Men like you men who think violence solves problems took them from me." A murmur ran through Sutton's men. This wasn't the confrontation they'd expected. "I'm sorry for your loss," Sutton said stiffly, "but it doesn't change anything. Callahan is responsible for my son's death." "And who will be responsible when more men die tonight?" Olivia challenged. "Will it bring Peter back? Will it ease your grief one iota?" Sutton's jaw worked silently, emotion warring across his features. "There has to be another way," Olivia continued. "Some solution that doesn't end with more graves, more widows, more fatherless children." Henry stepped forward. "The creek," he said suddenly. "We share it." Sutton blinked. "What?" "The water rights. We share them. Build a proper dam together, divert half the flow to your land during dry months. My cattle will have enough with the southern creek, and yours won't die of thirst when the drought comes." It was a significant concession, one that acknowledged Sutton's legitimate concerns while preserving Henry's ownership. For a long moment, Sutton said nothing. The night air was thick with tension as everyone waited for his response. "Half," he finally said. "In writing. And access rights across your land to reach it." "Limited access," Henry countered. "Designated routes only." Sutton nodded slowly. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers." "I'll have mine review them," Henry replied. Just like that, the confrontation deflated. No shots fired, no blood spilled. Sutton mounted his horse, tipping his hat with stiff formality. "Miss Grayson, Callahan." They watched in silence as Sutton and his men rode away, their figures gradually swallowed by the darkness. When they were gone, Henry turned to Olivia, his expression unreadable in the fading firelight. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen." "Perhaps both," she admitted. Without warning, Henry pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. Olivia froze momentarily, then slowly relaxed into his embrace, feeling the rapid beating of his heart against her cheek. "Don't ever scare me like that again," he murmured into her hair. "I can't promise that," Olivia replied honestly. Henry laughed softly, the sound rumbling through his chest. "No, I don't suppose you can." When he released her, the cowboys were pointedly busy with various tasks, giving them privacy while exchanging knowing glances among themselves. "We'll head back to the ranch at first light," Henry announced. "Jackson, take first watch. Thompson, you're next." As the camp settled for what remained of the night, Olivia found herself once again seated beside Henry near the fire. This time, however, he sat closer, their shoulders touching. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked softly. "About building something new?" Henry's gaze remained on the flames, but his hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Yes. I don't know if I remember how to hope anymore," Olivia confessed. "Then I'll remember for both of us until you do," Henry replied simply. They rode back to the ranch in the golden light of dawn, the tension of the previous night replaced by a cautious optimism. The land stretched before them, rolling hills dotted with bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush, cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. Olivia rode beside Henry, their conversation flowing more easily than it ever had before. He told her stories of the early days of the ranch, of his father's struggles and triumphs, of the community that had existed before disputes like the one with Sutton began to fracture it. "It wasn't always like this," he said as they crossed the creek that had been the center of the conflict. "People used to help each other more. A man's word meant something." "Perhaps it can be that way again," Olivia suggested. Henry glanced at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Perhaps." When they reached the main house, Frank and the other hands who'd been moving the herd were waiting, concern evident in their postures. "Boss," Frank called, hurrying forward. "We got your note, Miss Grayson." "Been worried sick." "Everything's all right, Frank," Henry assured him, dismounting. "Better than all right, actually. We've reached an understanding with Sutton." Frank's bushy eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Sutton, an understanding? What kind of sorcery is this?" Henry laughed, the sound lighter than Olivia had ever heard it. "No sorcery. Just a woman who knows how to speak truth to angry men." He helped Olivia down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist. Frank's gaze moved between them, a slow grin spreading across his weathered face. "Well, I'll be damned." "That'll be enough of that," Henry said, but there was no heat in his tone. "Get the men settled. We've got work to do." As the hands dispersed, Henry turned to Olivia. "You must be exhausted." She was bone-weary from the emotional and physical demands of the past day, but strangely invigorated as well. "I should check on Jimmy and the others." "They're fine," Henry assured her. "Rest. That's an order." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware I took orders from you, Mr. Callahan." "You don't," he admitted with a rueful smile. "It was worth a try." Their gazes held for a moment longer than necessary, something new and fragile blossoming between them. Then Olivia nodded. "I'll rest. But first, I need to speak with you privately." Henry led her to his study, closing the door behind them. The room was as she'd left it, neat and organized, a stack of correspondence on the desk awaiting his attention. "What is it?" he asked, concern creasing his brow. Olivia took a deep breath. "Last night, by the fire, you said we could build something new." "I did." "I need to know what you meant by that." Olivia met his gaze directly. "I won't be anyone's charity case, Henry, and I won't be a convenient arrangement either." Henry moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue-gray eyes. "Is that what you think I'm offering? Charity? Convenience?" "I don't know what you're offering," she replied honestly. "Then let me be clear." Henry's voice was low and intense. "I'm offering a chance for both of us to heal, to build a life that honors what we've lost but isn't defined by it. I'm offering companionship, respect, and if you'll have it, love." The word hung between them, almost tangible in the quiet room. "Love," Olivia repeated, the word foreign on her tongue after so long. "Not the fiery kind of youth," Henry clarified. "Something steadier, something that grows from shared understanding, mutual respect, common purpose." "And if I can't love you back?" Olivia asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if that part of me is truly broken beyond repair?" Henry's expression softened. "Then we'll work with what remains. But Olivia, I don't believe you're broken beyond repair. Wounded, yes. Scarred, certainly. But not beyond hope." Tentatively, he reached up to trace the line of her scar with gentle fingers. Olivia held perfectly still, resisting the urge to turn away as she usually did when attention was drawn to her disfigurement. "This doesn't diminish you," Henry said softly. "Not in my eyes." "And what do your eyes see?" Olivia whispered. "A woman of extraordinary courage. A woman who rode alone across dangerous territory to warn a stubborn man of danger. A woman who stood between two armed groups and spoke truth that neither wanted to hear but both needed to." His hand cradled her cheek, thumb brushing lightly over her skin. "I see someone I could build a life with if she's willing." Olivia closed her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions she'd thought long dead. Hope was the most terrifying of all, more frightening than grief or anger, because it had so much farther to fall. "I need time," she finally said. Henry nodded, dropping his hand. "Of course. Take all the time you need. My feelings won't change." The weeks that followed settled into a new pattern. Olivia continued her duties as housekeeper, but something fundamental had shifted in her relationship with Henry. They spoke more openly, shared meals together, occasionally rode the property side by side as Henry showed her the workings of the ranch. True to his word, Sutton had his lawyer draw up papers regarding the shared water rights. The tension between the neighboring ranches didn't disappear overnight, but the open hostility cooled. In late May, Henry suggested a trip into Fort Worth. "There's a social at the church Saturday evening," he said casually over breakfast. "Might be nice to hear some music, see some folks who aren't covered in trail dust." Olivia hesitated. She'd avoided town since their last visit, preferring the solitude of the ranch where fewer eyes judged her scar, fewer whispers followed her movements. "You don't have to go," Henry added, noting her silence, "but I'd be honored if you'd accompany me." The simple sincerity of his request decided her. "I'll need a new dress." Henry's face lit up with a genuine smile. "I'm sure Mrs. Patterson would be delighted to help with that." The dress they selected was a deep green that brought out the color of Olivia's eyes and complemented her auburn hair. It was more fashionable than anything she'd worn since before the fire, with a modest neckline and sleeve length that still managed to flatter her figure. As they entered the church social, Olivia was acutely aware of the stares and whispers. She kept her head high, her hand resting lightly on Henry's arm. "Miss Grayson," Mrs. Patterson hurried over, beaming. "Don't you look lovely? That color is perfect for you." "Thank you," Olivia replied, genuinely touched by the older woman's warmth. "And thank you for your help with the dress." "It was my pleasure, dear." Mrs. Patterson lowered her voice conspiratorially. "You've caused quite a stir arriving with Mr. Callahan. I don't think anyone's ever seen him at a social before, let alone with a lady on his arm." Henry cleared his throat. "I've attended socials, Martha." "Not in the last decade, you haven't," Mrs. Patterson retorted good-naturedly. As the evening progressed, Olivia found herself gradually relaxing. The music was lively, the food plentiful, and while there were certainly curious glances, most people were polite or even friendly. When Henry asked her to dance, Olivia hesitated only briefly before accepting. "It's been a long time," she warned. "I may step on your toes." "I'll risk it," he replied with a small smile. The dance was a simple waltz, nothing elaborate, but as Henry guided her around the floor, Olivia felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. His hand was warm and steady at her waist, his movements confident but gentle. "You're staring," she murmured, self-conscious under his intense gaze. "I can't help it," Henry admitted. "You're beautiful." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "Even with the scar, especially with the scar," he replied. "It's part of you, part of your story." "I wouldn't erase it any more than I'd erase the lines around my eyes or the calluses on my hands." Olivia looked away, overwhelmed. "You say impossible things sometimes." "Not impossible," Henry corrected. "Just true." As the music ended, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Victor Sutton stood in the doorway, scanning the room with narrowed eyes. Henry's posture stiffened, but he kept his voice calm. "Stay here." "No," Olivia said firmly, placing her hand on his arm. "We face this together." Sutton spotted them and made his way through the crowd, which parted nervously before him. His expression was unreadable, but he moved with purpose. "Callahan," he greeted stiffly. "Miss Grayson." "Sutton," Henry returned evenly. "This is a surprise." Sutton glanced around at the watching crowd. "I received your counter-offer through the lawyers today," Henry nodded. "And I find it acceptable." Sutton seemed to struggle with the words. "Your suggestions for the dam design are sound. I've instructed my men to cooperate with yours when construction begins." Relief washed over Olivia. This was as close to an olive branch as they were likely to get from the proud rancher. "I'm glad to hear it," Henry said sincerely. "It's a solution that benefits both our properties." Sutton hesitated, then added, My wife asked me to extend an invitation. Dinner at our ranch. Next Sunday if you're amenable." His gaze shifted briefly to Olivia. "Both of you." The invitation clearly cost him considerable pride. Olivia squeezed Henry's arm encouragingly. "We'd be honored," Henry replied. "Thank you." Sutton nodded once, then turned and left as abruptly as he'd arrived. The crowd burst into murmurs as soon as he was gone, the social momentarily forgotten in the wake of what everyone recognized as a significant moment. "Well," Henry said quietly, "that was unexpected." "Not entirely," Olivia replied. "He's a father who lost his son. That kind of grief can make a man do terrible things, but it can also eventually lead to clarity." Henry studied her face. "You understand him." "I understand his pain," Olivia corrected, "and the need to eventually find a way forward from it." The rest of the evening passed pleasantly, though Olivia was aware of the increased attention following Sutton's visit. When they finally left, the night air was cool and fragrant with early summer blossoms. Henry helped her into the wagon, then paused before climbing up himself. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said. "I know it wasn't easy." "It was easier than I expected," Olivia admitted. The ride back to the ranch was companionable, the road illuminated by a nearly full moon that silvered the landscape. Olivia found herself leaning slightly against Henry's solid presence, comfortable in a way she hadn't been with anyone since before the fire. When they reached the main house, Henry escorted her to her cabin, stopping at the bottom of the small porch steps. "I had a thought today," he said. "About the garden." Olivia smiled at the unexpected subject. "What about it? It's flourishing now with your care. Might be time to expand it." Henry gestured toward the open space behind the cabin. "There's good soil there, gets morning sun but afternoon shade from the oak trees." "What did you have in mind?" "Fruit trees," Henry suggested. "They take time to bear, of course. Years sometimes, but once established they produce for generations." Olivia understood the metaphor he was offering. Something that required patience, commitment, looking beyond immediate needs to future rewards. Something that would outlast them both. "I think fruit trees would be wonderful," she said softly. Henry's smile in the moonlight was tender. "I'll order some saplings from the nursery in Dallas. Apple, peach, maybe some plum." "Henry." Olivia stepped closer, her heart beating rapidly in her chest. "Ask me again. What you asked in your study that day." He went very still, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Henry took her hands in his expression solemn yet hopeful. "Olivia Grayson, will you build a new life with me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my heart's companion for whatever years were granted?" Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Henry's face transformed with joy, years seeming to fall away in an instant. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle, almost reverential, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Olivia felt something settle into place within her, a piece of herself she'd thought lost forever, returning like a bird to its nest after a long winter away. "I can't promise I won't still have dark days," she warned. "Days when grief feels overwhelming." "I know," Henry said. "I have them too. But now, neither of us has to face them alone." Their wedding, held in late July of 1875, was a simple affair on the grounds of the Double C. Reverend Michaels from Fort Worth performed the ceremony beneath the sprawling oak trees, with Frank Murphy serving as Henry's best man and Mrs. Patterson standing up for Olivia. To everyone's surprise, Victor and Alina Sutton were among the guests, their presence a public acknowledgement of the truce between the neighboring ranches. Olivia wore a dress of ivory silk, modest but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs that Mrs. Patterson had worked on personally. She carried wildflowers gathered from the ranch that morning, and her hair was arranged in a simple style adorned with small pearl pins that had belonged to Henry's mother. Henry, dressed in a new black suit, watched with undisguised adoration as Frank escorted her to his side. When she reached him, he took her hands in his voice steady as he repeated the vows that would bind them together. I, Henry James Callahan, take you, Olivia Marie Grayson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. The words were traditional, but the emotion behind them transformed them into something profound and personal. As Olivia spoke her own vows, she felt the last of her protective walls crumble, allowing hope to fully take root in the fertile soil of her heart. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Michaels declared with a broad smile. You may kiss your bride, Henry. Their kiss was brief but heartfelt, mindful of their audience yet unmistakably tender. The small gathering erupted in cheers and applause, none louder than the double C hands who had watched their relationship unfold from the beginning. The celebration afterward was joyous tables laden with food, a fiddle player from town providing music for dancing, and enough good wishes to last a lifetime. As the sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the ranch yard, Henry found Olivia standing apart from the crowd, watching the horizon. Happy? He asked softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Olivia leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid warmth of him. Yes, she answered truthfully. I didn't think I could be again. Henry pressed a kiss to her temple right along the edge of her scar. We've only just begun, Mrs. Callahan. The name sent a shiver of pleasure through her. Say that again. Mrs. Callahan, Henry murmured against her skin. My wife, my heart. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a warm glow over the continued celebrations, Olivia and Henry slipped away to the main house, their house now. In the privacy of the bedroom that would henceforth be theirs, they discovered each other with a tenderness that acknowledged both their individual wounds and their shared healing. Later, as moonlight filtered through the curtains and Henry slept beside her, Olivia thought of the fruit trees they had planted the week before, tiny saplings now, but someday strong and fruitful. Like their love, like the life they were building together, those trees would require nurturing, patience, and faith in a future they might not always be able to envision clearly. But they had made a start. And sometimes, beginning again was the bravest act of all. Spring 1880, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows of the main house at the Double C Ranch. Olivia smiled as she kneaded bread dough, pausing to watch through the kitchen window as Henry chased their 3-year-old son, Michael, around the yard. The boy's delighted squeals filled the air, each time his father pretended he couldn't quite catch him. 5 years of marriage had brought changes to the ranch, a new wing added to the main house, improved fencing, a sturdy dam on the northern creek built in cooperation with the Sutton Ranch, and most significantly, 2 children. Michael James Callahan had his father's blue-gray eyes and his mother's auburn hair. He was a sturdy, curious boy who loved animals and followed Frank Murphy around like a shadow whenever the old foreman would allow it. Sarah Elizabeth, just 8 months old, was currently napping in her cradle near the kitchen stove. She had been named for Henry's first wife, a gesture that had moved him to tears when Olivia suggested it. The baby was fair-haired and blue-eyed, with a smile that could melt the hardest heart. Olivia looked up as the kitchen door opened and Henry entered with Michael slung upside down over his shoulder, the boy giggling uncontrollably. "We've captured a wild Mustang, Mama," Henry announced. "What should we do with him?" Olivia pretended to consider seriously. Wild mustangs need oats, I believe, and perhaps some of those cookies cooling on the rack. I'm not a mustang, Michael protested through his laughter. I'm a boy. Are you certain? Henry asked, setting him right side up. You run as fast as any horse I've seen. I'm Michael, the boy insisted. Your son. Henry caught Olivia's eye over their son's head, his expression softening. Yes, you are, the finest son a man could ask for. Olivia wiped her hands on her apron and bent to kiss Michael's forehead. One cookie now, the rest after dinner. As Michael happily munched his treat, Henry moved to Olivia's side, slipping an arm around her waist. Rider coming, he murmured. Looks like Frank, and he's pushing his horse hard. Olivia glanced out the window, concern immediately rising at the sight of the foreman's urgent approach. Trouble. We'll see. Henry pressed a quick kiss to her temple before stepping back outside to meet Frank as he dismounted. Through the open door, Olivia could hear their conversation. Boss, got word from town, Frank said, breathing heavily. That fella you've been asking about, the one from Fort Worth. Sheriff Tanner says he's been spotted heading this way. Henry's posture stiffened. When? Yesterday. Stopped at Jensen's place asking directions to the Double C. Olivia's heart began to pound. They'd known this day might come eventually, had prepared for it as best they could, but the reality was still terrifying. Get the men back to the house, Henry ordered. I want everyone close. Frank nodded and remounted his horse, riding toward where the hands were working the southern pasture. Henry returned to the kitchen, his expression grave. Olivia, I heard, she said, trying to keep her voice steady for Michael's sake. Edward Blackwood. Henry nodded once. Could be nothing. Could be he just wants to talk. They both knew better. For 3 years, Henry had been making discreet inquiries, tracking the movements of the man responsible for the deaths of Olivia's first husband and son. 6 months ago, word had reached them that Blackwood had learned of Olivia's new life at the Double C. Michael, darling, go play in your room for a bit, Olivia said, her voice impressively calm. The boy looked between his parents, sensing the tension. Is something wrong, Mama? No, sweetheart. Papa and I just need to talk about grown-up things. Once Michael had reluctantly departed, Olivia turned to Henry. What do we do? Henry's face was resolute. We stick to the plan. You and the children go to the Sutton Ranch. Eleanor is expecting you, and leave you to face him alone. No. Olivia shook her head firmly. That wasn't the plan, Henry. Plans change. Not this one, Olivia insisted. We face him together or not at all. Henry ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Olivia, be reasonable. The children will be safe with Eleanor, yes. But I will not hide while you confront the man who murdered my family. Olivia's voice broke slightly on the last words. They stared at each other for a long moment, the tension between them not of anger but of mutual concern, each wanting to protect the other. Very well, Henry finally conceded. But at the first sign of trouble, you get to safety. Promise me. I promise, Olivia agreed, knowing she would do whatever necessary to protect their children but equally determined to stand beside her husband in this confrontation. The preparations were swift and efficient. Sarah and Michael were bundled into the wagon with their nurse, Martha, a kindly older woman who had joined the household after Sarah's birth. Victor Sutton himself arrived to escort them to his ranch, his face grim with understanding of the situation. Eleanor has everything ready, he assured Olivia as Martha settled the children in the wagon. They'll be safe with us. Thank you, Olivia said, squeezing his hand gratefully. In the 5 years since their rocky beginning, the relationship between the Callahans and the Suttons had evolved from tense truce to genuine friendship. Eleanor Sutton, a gentle woman who had suffered through her husband's grief-driven rage and emerged with her compassion intact, had become particularly dear to Olivia. "Be careful," Victor added in a low voice. "Blackwood has a reputation even in these parts." "We will," Henry promised, clasping the other man's hand. Olivia knelt beside the wagon to kiss her children goodbye, fighting back tears as Michael's small arms wrapped around her neck. "We're going to visit Aunt Alina and Uncle Victor," she explained. "It will be an adventure." "Why aren't you and Papa coming?" Michael asked, his lower lip trembling slightly. "We'll join you very soon," Henry assured him, ruffling his hair. "Be a good boy and look after your sister." As the wagon pulled away, Olivia felt a piece of her heart go with it. She watched until it disappeared down the long drive, then turned to face the ranch house that had become her home, the home she was prepared to defend. "They'll be safe," Henry said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know." Olivia took a deep breath. "What now?" "Now we wait." They didn't have to wait long. Less than 2 hours after the children's departure, a group of riders appeared on the horizon, 5 men, approaching at a steady pace that suggested confidence rather than caution. Henry and Olivia watched from the front porch, Frank and 6 armed ranch hands positioned strategically around the house and barn. The Double C men had been loyal to Henry for years. They would fight if necessary. As the riders drew closer, Olivia could make out the leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with iron gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. Even at a distance, there was something commanding about him, an authority that had nothing to do with law or justice and everything to do with power and its abuses. "That's him," she said softly. "Blackwood." Henry's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Remember your promise." The riders stopped at the edge of the yard, spreading out slightly in a formation that was clearly meant to intimidate. Blackwood surveyed the ranch house, his gaze eventually settling on Olivia. "Mrs. Grayson," he called, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Or I suppose it's Mrs. Callahan now." Olivia stepped forward, Henry beside her. "Mr. Blackwood, you're a long way from Fort Worth." "Business brings me west," Blackwood replied, his tone almost cordial. "Unfinished business, specifically." "Any business you had with my wife was concluded years ago," Henry said evenly. Blackwood smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "I disagree. Your wife's husband owed me a considerable sum. Debts don't disappear with death, Mr. Callahan." "Neither does murder," Olivia responded, her voice stronger than she felt. "Your men killed James and Michael. They left me for dead." Blackwood's expression hardened. "Strong accusations from a woman with no proof. The fire was ruled an accident, as I recall. We both know it wasn't." Olivia took another step forward, ignoring Henry's restraining hand. "You've come a long way for nothing, Mr. Blackwood. There will be no money, no satisfaction for you here." The businessman's gaze traveled over the prosperous ranch, the solid house, the well-maintained outbuildings, the healthy cattle visible in nearby pastures. "On the contrary, I see plenty here to satisfy old debts, plus interest. This is my property," Henry stated flatly. "None of it is available to you at any price." Blackwood's men shifted restlessly, hands moving closer to the weapons at their sides. The Double C hands responded in kind, the tension ratcheting higher with each passing moment. "I've heard about you, Callahan," Blackwood said. "They say you're a fair man, reasonable. I'm hoping that's true because there are 2 ways this can go." He gestured around the ranch. "You can compensate me for my losses. I'd accept a herd of cattle, for instance, or things could get unpleasant." "There's a third option," came a new voice. All heads turned to see Victor Sutton riding into the yard, flanked by several of his own men. He guided his horse to stand beside Henry and Olivia. "Mr. Blackwood," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "I'm Victor Sutton, owner of the neighboring ranch." Blackwood frowned, clearly unhappy with this unexpected development. "This doesn't concern you, Sutton." "I disagree." Victor's voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of steel. "The Callahans are friends of mine. Their children are currently guests in my home. That makes this very much my concern." Olivia shot him a grateful look, heart swelling at this tangible evidence of how far they had all come from the days of bitter enmity. "Additionally," Victor continued, "I'm a member of the Cattlemen's Association, as is Callahan. We take a dim view of outsiders threatening our members." Blackwood's confident demeanor faltered slightly. He glanced around, reassessing the situation. What had begun as 5 men against 7 had now become 5 against more than a dozen, all of whom knew the terrain intimately. "I'm a businessman," Blackwood said, a new note of caution in his voice. "I'm always open to negotiation." "There's nothing to negotiate," Henry replied firmly. "You have no legitimate claim here. I suggest you return to Fort Worth." Blackwood's face darkened with anger. "The woman carries a debt." "The woman," Olivia interrupted, "is right here. And I owe you nothing but contempt, Mr. Blackwood. Your men burned my home and murdered my family over a debt that could have been repaid with time. Whatever James owed you died with him." For a tense moment, it seemed Blackwood might order his men to attack regardless of the odds. Then, surprisingly, he laughed a sharp, humorless sound. "You've grown a spine, Mrs. Callahan. I remember you as a broken creature, begging for your husband's life." He straightened in his saddle. "Very well. Consider the debt forgiven, a wedding gift, shall we say?" No one relaxed at this apparent concession. The insincerity in Blackwood's tone was obvious to all. "On one condition," he added, his gaze fixed on Olivia. "Tell me how you survived." "My men reported the house collapsed with you inside." Olivia swallowed hard, memories of that terrible night washing over her. "Your men were careless. They didn't check to make sure I was dead before they rode away. A neighbor saw the flames and pulled me out." It wasn't the complete truth. She had dragged herself from the burning wreckage after the roof collapsed, sustained by pure desperation to reach her son, but Blackwood didn't need to know that. "A costly oversight," Blackwood mused. "I'll have to speak with them about that." "You'll do more than speak with them," Henry said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You'll turn them over to the law for murder." Blackwood's eyebrows rose. "Will I, indeed? And what makes you think I'd do that?" "Because if you don't," Henry replied evenly, "I'll personally ensure that every businessman, banker, and cattleman from here to St. Louis knows exactly what kind of man Edward Blackwood really is. How many loans do you think you'll secure then? How many contracts?" It was a shrewd threat, targeting Blackwood's livelihood and reputation rather than his physical safety. The businessman's face tightened as he considered the implications. "You can't prove anything," he finally said, but his tone lacked conviction. "I don't need to prove it in court," Henry countered. "Only in the court of public opinion. You know how rumors spread." A muscle ticked in Blackwood's jaw as he stared at Henry, measuring the threat against his options. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "It seems we've reached an impasse, Callahan. I'll return to Fort Worth for now." His gaze slid to Olivia. "But I don't forget, Mrs. Callahan. Remember that." "Neither do I," Olivia replied steadily. "Which is why if you ever come near my family again, I'll kill you myself." The simple declaration, delivered without heat or dramatics, seemed to finally penetrate Blackwood's armor of arrogance. He studied Olivia with new eyes, perhaps seeing for the first time not the victim he remembered but the woman she had become, strong, determined, and utterly unafraid of him. Without another word, he wheeled his horse around and signaled to his men. They rode away at a measured pace, dignity intact but threat neutralized. No one spoke until the riders were well out of sight. Then Frank let out a low whistle. "Mrs. Callahan, Remind me never to get on your bad side." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the assembled men, tension bleeding away with Blackwood's departure. Victor dismounted, clasping Henry's hand firmly. "He won't be back," Victor said with certainty. "Men like that are cowards at heart. They only strike where they think they can win." Henry nodded his agreement, then turned to Olivia, concern evident in his expression. "Are you all right?" Olivia realized she was trembling slightly, reaction setting in now that the confrontation was over. But beneath the physical response was a profound sense of closure, of a chapter finally ended. "I'm fine," she said, and meant it. "Better than fine." That evening, after the children had been retrieved from the Sutton ranch and settled back in their own beds, Olivia stood in the orchard behind the house. The fruit trees they had planted 5 years earlier were now sturdy young specimens, some beginning to bear their first small crops of apples and peaches. Henry found her there as twilight deepened, wrapping his arms around her from behind just as he had on the day of their wedding. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured. Olivia leaned back against him, taking comfort in his solid presence. "I was thinking about what I said to you that night by the campfire years ago. That you were damaged beyond repair," Henry recalled. "Yes." "And your response, that we would build something new." Olivia turned in his arms to face him. "You were right. We did build something new, something I couldn't have imagined possible back then." Henry's eyes were warm as he gazed down at her. "We built it together. That's what made the difference." "Yes," Olivia agreed softly. "Together." As darkness fell completely, they walked hand in hand back to their home, where their children slept peacefully, where memories both painful and precious lived side by side, where they had indeed built something new from the ashes of what was lost. And in the years that followed, as their children grew, as the ranch prospered, as the fruit trees matured and yielded abundant harvests, Olivia often thought of that simple exchange that had changed everything. "I'm damaged beyond repair," she had confessed, believing it with every fiber of her being. "Then we'll build something new," the cowboy had said, and they had. Day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment, they had built a life that honored their past wounds but wasn't defined by them. A life of substance and meaning, of deep joy and authentic connection. A life that proved healing was possible, even from the most devastating losses. Not because the damage disappeared, it didn't, not completely. The scar on Olivia's face remained, as did the invisible scars they both carried in their hearts. But they had learned to incorporate those marks into the tapestry of their shared life, neither denying their existence nor allowing them to dictate their future. They had built something new, something lasting, something beautiful, and that, Olivia knew with absolute certainty, was the greatest triumph of all.